First, I'd like to begin by thanking you all for giving me this opportunity to make a few brief comments on Professor Hacking's work. It's actually really an honor because I never thought that I would actually end up being in the same room with Professor Hacking or, in fact, commenting on his work, given that my first confrontation with his work was as a student. And I thought that by the time I got to the point where I would be asked to comment on your work, you would have certainly said your goodbyes and moved on. So it's great. It's great to see that we have actually met in the same space and time. My comments here are going to take the point of departure in one of the issues that was thematized in the World Social Science Forum that took place here in Bergen a couple of months ago. I thought it might be good to start with this so that we come back to Bergen at some point. And this point was that the evolving or the new science-society relationship puts into question the role of the social sciences and the humanities. One of the things that threatens and brings fear into the hearts of the social scientists and the humanists these days is that question that seems perennially on the lips of policymakers, which is, what has science done for society lately? And strangely enough, those of us who are in the business of discussing, conceptualizing, and analyzing society cannot answer that question satisfactorily to save our lives and, more importantly, to keep our funding. So I thought that one of the things that we could do today would be to return to this question. For those of you who were present at the informal gathering last night, note the snub factor creeping in here, you may recall that one speech was given. And since it was an informal gathering, we only had one speech. And that's how we know that it's an informal gathering in academia, that only one speech was given. This person took a point which I think fits well with what I want to say today, and that is he took up the issue of why is it we have such celebratory moments in science, such as the Holberg Prize, and what is the significance of these moments for science. And I'd like to continue by exploring and extending this by saying what is the significance of these moments for society and our relationship as researchers with society. And if I might complement this issue a bit more, I think that one of the ways in which we most competently meet our obligation to relate what we do to our paymasters is by making that obligation upfront and present in celebratory moments such as this. And I think that both my two colleagues, Dagfinn and Bruna, captured this very well in their own way, and what I will try to do is to sort of bring it all home by putting it down in very, very pedestrian terms, because that's what is my specialty, being pedestrian. If we want to return to the issue of how do the social scientists and the humanists sort of demonstrate the utility of their topics, it's not just an issue of saying, okay, social science and humanities have found out this, that, and the other, and therefore we have been able to... What was that? And therefore we have been able to come up with the final answer to the meaning of life. But it's also a question of asking what kinds of questions do we want to pose, and how do we teach society, and how do we teach our coming generations the art of asking the right questions at the right time. And I think that this particular contribution of the humanities and the social sciences is best exemplarized in Professor Hacking's work, and it's one of the issues that we tend to forget in our questions to social scientists and humanists when we pose the question, what have you done for society lately? Now, both Dagfinn and Bruna focused very much on Professor Hacking's work and that part of it which deals with the natural sciences or the philosophy of the natural sciences. I thought, as Ragnar pointed out earlier, that for me it was a very interesting discovery to read Professor Hacking's work on the most socially relevant issues rather than issues of uncertainty and probability, etc., which of course are very relevant, but they are kind of like our sort of daily sort of diet within the social sciences and the humanities. This is the stuff that I sort of grew up chewing on, and it really wasn't, it was very good for me to write my papers, but if I wanted to sort of move from there to something else in my role as layperson, then I wanted to figure out how would philosophy as a subject take on questions of political or social importance. And this is why I particularly enjoyed reading your contributions on issues like multiple personality disorder, homosexuality, child abuse, etc., because I think this is a niche that is unexplored, and it's a very interesting area of work being done. And here I come to the very ungrateful task that I proposed in my lecture topic, which is the task of constructing Professor Hacking as a public intellectual. And I say this is an ungrateful task not because it's difficult to construct Hacking as such, but because as academics we are trained in the art of making representations and interventions for each other or for people of like-minded persuasion. So it's not necessarily a compliment to one of us to construct us as a public intellectual. It means that this person might actually be engaged in the dubious exercise of casting pearls before swine. And this, of course, is not something that we are all engaged in doing, so that it might very well be extremely upsetting to Professor Hacking to note that I intend to construct him as a public intellectual. But I have, in this, learned from Hacking himself, in that I have also understood that by arguing that I'm constructing him as a public intellectual, I also point to the possibility that things could be otherwise. I also understand from reading Hacking's work that the act of constructing is also essentially a normative activity. It's an activity of pointing to the existence of norms that have been left out, but it's also an activity of pointing to the existence of norms that can be included. So while I'm in the process of constructing Hacking as public intellectual, I might be able to point out maybe he's not a public intellectual after all, but I might also be able to point out ways in which he could be construed as a public intellectual. And in order to do this, of course, we have to start out by defining the nature of the beast in all good humanist fashion, and that is what on earth is a public intellectual, and why do we need them? Well, if you think about public intellectuals, at least if you're thinking about it from my perspective, my first thought is I think about the so-called jet-set celebrity academics we used to have, people like Said, etc., who go around and pronounce on all kinds of controversial things. And I think back in his day, if Foucault had lived long enough, he would have also been one of these celebrity types. And I have a little bit of trouble sort of associating Hacking with this particular crowd. He's just not sort of, I don't know, that is probably unfair to say, but he just doesn't have that oomph and the ability to say the obvious in such an obviously uninteresting manner, but catches public attention. So I don't think that you managed to make the grade on that. Even the most willful social constructivist wouldn't be able to make you into a public intellectual on that, from that particular definition. But of course, there are several other definitions of public intellectuals. We have public intellectuals who are people who speak and write about their field of study in clear and simple terms that everybody can understand. And note, a public intellectual does not necessarily have to be an academic, but sometimes it helps to be an academic. And in these days where we in the university have managed to seek rent for every possible activity that is intelligent, i.e. you need a degree in order to just be in the world these days, it means that you can't really be a public intellectual without having some kind of academic training. In other words, all roads go through us. And this is why we are in the state that we are in today, where we are being asked, what have you done for society lately? This is always a problem, that when you become a little too greedy in your rent seeking, you end up in a situation of having to justify the rents you charge for. So to go back to the issue of public intellectuals, I would say that hacking makes the grade on the business of being able to write about his field of study in clear and simple terms. I think that is one of the things that comes out most clearly here today. But is that all that there is about a public intellectual? Let's say we take one step further and say, okay, having written and understood one's discipline and made it understood to other people, let's say we up the ante a bit and say, how about having this person put the particular topic of interest in a broader social, cultural, and political context. Now we're talking about looking at, say, multiple personality disorder as a particular diagnosis that has developed over several decades, looking at how particular practitioners and professionals have dealt with this diagnosis in different contexts, even taking on the interesting claim, which I think most people who are not familiar with the North American context miss, and that is the notion Hacking suggests in multiple personality disorder, Rewriting the Soul. He suggests that one of the reasons that child abuse has become so important to the whole discussion of multiple personality disorder is the particular, how should I put it in politically correct terms, the particular vagaries of American reasoning about politics and the difficulties to confront the actual existence of the poor and to come up with a social consensus for dealing with problems of the poor. So that in order to confront these problems, they have to be framed in another context. And one context, of course, is that you can frame in many ways. You can frame in terms of looking at issues and place them in a context that everybody has got a special understanding about and a consensus about. Or you can frame issues in a context that you know that everybody's agreed that this is bad. So child abuse is a problem that is not socially contextualized. It happens across families, and it was very important to show that this was not a problem that was in any way a poverty-related problem, but that can strike in the hearts of all families. And by doing so, one is able to then get child abuse under a gender as an issue that can be dealt with politically. Now, that particular insight, of course, is I would call a typical Hackinism, in the sense that he has been able to present in a very concise and common sense fashion some very difficult and, in many instances, controversial issues, like how is it so that there is a particular social consensus within one of the richest countries in the world that helping the poor is problematic. And stating that for instance, I could not do that, you see, because I just do not have the kind of sophistication to frame a problem in that fashion. I would simply say, well, the Americans, you know, have always had problems with dealing with poverty, and they don't care about poor people, therefore this was a good idea. So you see, so there are some reasons why this kind of skill is also important. It's not just the message, but how you communicate it. So that in that sense, I would say that having managed to not only confront the public with philosophy in its without sort of dumbing it down. What Hacking does not do is present you with philosophy light. He presents you with a very fundamental introduction to the issues at hand and the philosophical issues on which they touch upon in a very clear fashion. And I think that is one of the ways, or one of the ways in which we would argue that one would want to be a public intellectual. As I said to Ragnar, the other thing is that the third definition of a public intellectual is the kind of academic who always has a mic or a camera in front of his or her face. The kind of academic who's able to produce what I call soundbite knowledge. You know, they're always there with a catchy phrase that appears to simplify problems, but later on appears to make them much more complex. This kind of academic is a problem. And why is it a problem in the age of science society, new science society relations? Because this notion of a public intellectual and this notion of the role of the academic when communicating in society assumes that the media is a sine qua non for communicating to the public. So that Jim, John, Sven, Per do not ever read or think about issues. They only ever have a confrontation with issues they care about via the media, television, journalists. The whole notion that there are people out there who are not university trained, who might actually sit in a chair, read a book about child abuse instead of turning on their TV and have soundbite opinions of child abuse fed to them, doesn't exist anymore. And this is why, to the extent that we communicate to the public, we have to be always writing some nonsense in 2,000 characters in Morgenbladet or Aftenposten or so. That is now the measure of the academic. And I think one of the reasons that Hacking's work, I think, should be regarded as a Kuhnian exemplar is that he manages to show that you do not have to get out there, your characters out there in Morgenbladet to be relevant. That you don't have to depart and descend into soundbite knowledge creation in order to address the fundamentals and in order to participate in social debate. However, having praised Hacking, I need to point out that he has got a dark side. And this is the dark side that I'd like to end with. Because you see, Hacking does not only point to the reasonableness of social constructivism, he also slips in a couple of disturbing ideas for the likes of people like Gross and Levitt. For instance, you will find in reading The Social Construction of What, I think, the notion that the natural is constructed, that the natural is often a way of, that when people employ the term natural, they often use this to privilege a particular set of things which then become unquestioned by being denoted natural. Now, this is not the kind of idea that Gross and Levitt would like to see in your work, Professor Hacking. This, one step away from this, and we are back into saying that the objects of natural science are not natural. And could that really be true? The other is the business when Hacking points out that, well, is it really sensible to talk about the social construction of things? Isn't it so that we all understand at some point or the other that things are essentially socially constructed? But I noticed that in the question time to Dag Finn's, after Dag Finn's intervention, that particular question did show up. And that question is actually a question that hacking always returns to, but never really satisfactorily answers. And my hypothesis, which I would like to leave you here with today, is that this is one of the ways in which hacking both confirms and destabilizes the constructivist discourse. And this is one of the aspects of his work that I think is not so well appreciated. That while he makes social constructivism very reasonable, and he shows that you can be a constructivist without descending into radical epistemological relativism, which of course is the nightmare of every philosopher. Oh boy, that everything should be equal. That what would happen to us if that would happen. But he also then, having showed it to be reasonable, points out to some of the problems that still exist with social constructivism without sort of making a big fanfare about it. But if you read the stuff, you will see that there is a kind of, on one hand, you say, oh, it's very interesting to see how this multiple personality disorder diagnosis has developed. And look at this very even-handed treatment of the different groups among psychologists, and even the feminist handling of the issue. But with a clever mix of irony and very insidious questions. One sometimes, wakes up in the middle of the night, people like me who haven't got better things to do, and ask, well, I wonder what hacking really thinks about those feminists who said X, Y, and Z. Can he really be as open-minded as that? Or by, simply inserting this particular moment in the debate? Because not only do we present all the different parts of the debate, but which moments from those parts that one presents are also very important to constructing the debate. And so why did hacking present this particular feminist view of the issue, or that particular psychologist view of the issue? And I hope that he would address this dark side of his work a little bit when we go to comments. And this is my contribution. Thank you. Betty didn't think I would finish quickly.
But use the microphone.
In the same vein as the first one, and that is, isn't there a danger in socially constructing hacking that you take his freedom away?
No, because we have what hacking calls the looping effect. He is not an object who is unable to talk back. He can fight against the construction, and he can also act in other ways than those which I have claimed in my construction. Whereas in my construction now it's stuck in time and space. But hacking is free to continue to act and prove me incorrect. So the power of agency and the power of the looping effect is what makes hacking continue to be free, even from constructions of his more rabid colleagues.
More questions, comments? Come on. Yeah.
Hi. Can you say a little bit more about what it is you take? You said philosophers have this nightmare of everything being equal. What is it, which things do you take philosophers to think are equal?
Well, the business about epistemological relativism has gotten us in a lot of trouble. And that is because by arguing that all knowledge claims have the same status, we then run into some difficulties of fascinating nature or not so fascinating nature when we get into the realm of the everyday world. As long as this business stays within the realm of philosophy, it's A-okay. The problem is when the Janata party in India decides that Hindu knowledge is just as good as, God forbid, philosophy, Western philosophy, or even physics or that Mbeki decides that HIV medicine is, Western HIV medicine is not necessarily a good idea, that we might as well have, whatever, herbal concoctions there are available, etc., or superstitions, etc. These are the sort of consequences of epistemological relativism that we are afraid of, because it's bad business for every philosopher in town, you see. We can't have that kind of talk going on.
So it's about science versus any other grounds for knowledge.
Well, yes, ultimately, I think that's where we are going, but it's also about the business. I would say that we would prefer to frame it in terms of, it's about continuing the project of modernity and accepting that one of our missions since the Enlightenment has been to stamp out superstition wherever it might exist. That sounds like a good cartoon.
A last question, comment? We have time. Yes, we have one. Wait for the microphone, then you will.
You constructed Mr. Hacking as a relevant intellectual, and you opposed that sort of relevancy to the other public intellectual that degrades himself to the 2000 not words, but 2000 signs.
Characters, yeah.
In Morgenblad and Aftenposten. What does that relevancy consist in, and to whom, and, well, how is that relevancy constructed?
How is what relevance?
Mr. Hacking's relevance.
Well, that is based on taking what one knows, one's expertise, which is the reason that one gets a place in Morgenbladet, apart from being a friend with the journalist. That one has some particular expertise, and then applying this to a problem that society cares about. This is what we call relevance. We take up issues that are on the social and political sort of debate table, or we sometimes show new social and political issues that have not got into the popular sphere, and the only way we can come with that extra is through going via the route of our expertise. However, the 2,000 character business often gets us into trouble, because all science has got a particular limitation. It doesn't matter whether it's natural, social, or human sciences. It requires a long learning curve before you get to the top. And 2,000 characters just doesn't give you the potential to do that. There are also very few of us who are trained in the art of communicating what we know in terms that will not be misunderstood, either willfully or otherwise, in 2,000 characters. So what I'm talking about is not about an opposition to this way of communicating, but an acceptance of the limitations of our training and what it can do.
Can I just follow up very quickly?
I think we stop there. Thank you very much again.